Funding for Lawmakers comes from the University of West Georgia, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, details of a statewide plan from Transportation Chair Vance Smith. GPB Radio's John Sepulveda fills us in on a proposed Medicaid tax, and Coca-Cola Enterprises is recognized for environmental leadership. Those stories and more are coming up next.
This is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Nwandi Lawson and David Zelski.
Also on tonight's broadcast, Representative Ron Stevens urges adoption of a $1 tobacco tax in the House. And Representative Roger Bruce reintroduces the Parent Protection Act.
And we'll have a look back at the first week under the Gold Dome in the 2009 legislative session. But first, our top story tonight, a statewide transportation plan. The governor, lieutenant governor, and House Speaker have all this week spoken in favor of a statewide transportation plan. Today, House Transportation Chairman Vance Smith gave me a preview of what the plan could look like and how it could be paid for.
A statewide 1-cent sales tax. If you do a statewide 1-cent sales tax with no exemptions, over a 10-year period, we'd look to bring in between $20 and $25 billion. We have roads across the state, maybe up North Georgia. Some of the interstates aren't quite wide enough. Maybe they need another lane or two. Roads such as 316, which really should be a separated grade, meaning that should be more of an interstate system type road instead of all the red lights along there. We're looking at light rail, commuter rail. That would be big, probably in the northern part of Atlanta, around the Cumberland CID, Perimeter CID, up toward Kennesaw State, up toward Gwinnett Place Mall. So you've got those big ticket items that we're looking at in the statewide plan. We've taken 30 cities in the state of Georgia, 30 of the largest populated cities in the state, meaning they have a population of 15,000 or more, and saying, okay, for each one person with this plan, we would give $1,000, meaning a place like Richmond, Augusta would get $192,000 because that's their population. Another city down the line that may have 44,000 people, $1,000 per person. And let those cities, along with whatever the governance authority ends up being, let them sit down and plan, and maybe they could use that money for transit, for more buses. Maybe they need an intersection improved. Maybe they need a guardrail somewhere. Let those cities, they know better locally what they need. Let those people decide what they'd like to spend that money on.
Smith says he hopes to have legislation creating the statewide transportation plan in about a week. The resolution will call for a referendum on the statewide transportation sales tax in November 2010.
One proposal Governor Perdue announced this week would tax hospitals and health plans 1.6%. That money would then be used to help plug a $200 million plus Medicaid hole in the state's budget. GPB Radio's Rome Bureau Chief John Sepulveda joined me this afternoon to discuss this issue. I began by asking if this was indeed a new tax in Georgia.
David, there's not anybody I've spoken to that said it wouldn't be a new tax. They just don't want to say it's going to be a new tax. And basically the way it would work is any net revenues that a hospital has, they would pay 1.6%. So let's say that you get an ouchie and you go to the hospital and you pay, there's going to be a 1.6% tax for whatever that you pay. I get the same ouchie, I go to the same hospital, I don't pay, there's not going to be a 1.6% tax. So what they're really trying to do is capture some of those revenues that are going to the hospitals as a way of making up this Medicaid shortfall.
And you've been looking at the statistics on this. How did Medicaid get themselves in this giant hole?
The state senator I speak to said automatically when I asked him that question, the federal government. The federal government did a reimbursement change to Medicaid, and that most of the shortfall comes from that readjustment. And so the state has to do something, David, because let's say they just let it go. This $208 million, fine, it's gone. Well, the state's actually going to lose more money because there are federal matching funds. It gets kind of complicated, but the deal is they either come up with that $208 million or they could be out, I heard one estimate as high as $500 million.
Okay, well, the group that is very affected by this, that's the healthcare industry. How are they looking at it?
Right now, they're not saying a whole lot. There's a committee hearing on it next week. We're going to see a lot more of a public stance. Privately, they're not too happy about it. Let me give you an example why. I live in Floyd County. There is a public hospital, there's a private hospital. Under this proposal, the private hospital would pay almost $4 million, just based on the numbers. The public hospital would pay about $3.2 million. That's a big difference because that public hospital might get $3.2 million lost in Medicaid funding, while that private hospital is probably going to be out that $4 million. So there's not a unified response from the hospitals, and they're still trying to figure a way to make it work.
Looking at losing property tax grants, that's a tough issue for legislators to have to deal with. This looks like it could be another tough issue that they're going to have to deal with.
Would you, if you were a politician, would you want to campaign and say, I voted to implement a new tax, and not only that, a tax that's being called the hospital bed tax? I don't think many politicians would want to do that. On the flip side, I don't think many politicians would want to say, I did nothing as the state lost $500 million for the poorest citizens to get that provides money for their health care.
And it sounds like Governor Perdue doesn't want to sit around and wait for the federal money.
Well, it's not so much that. They have to come up with some kind of plan, or they're going to lose that federal money on this one issue. Democrats are strongly opposed to this plan. They have not come up with an alternative as of yet. All
right. Well, John Sepulveda, GPB's Rome Bureau Chief, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, David.
Representative Ron Stevens was in the well this morning, urging the House to adopt a $1 increase to the state's tobacco tax, a move he says would eliminate the need for property tax increases and the new tax on hospitals and insurance companies.
I want to give you an update. Yesterday, the House of Representatives in Mississippi passed the buck, and it's in the Senate, and I got it from Alan Nunley, the Tupelo, Mississippi Chairman of Appropriations. That bill's going to pass just like it is. We can continue to be 43rd in the country. Actually, we're going to drop below some of these other states on where we rank with tobacco tax in the state. Or we can continue, folks, to fund $537 million in tobacco illnesses to Medicaid recipients. And by the way, you can't raise their insurance premium. You just pay for it, and I do too. We can continue to spend $2.25 billion every year in tobacco-related illnesses, which, strangely enough, is about the budget deficit for this state this year. It's okay to pass the buck, folks. I've got $350 million in my pocket, and I hope you'll sign on here with me.
House Bill 39 would increase the tax on cigarettes from 37 cents to $1.37. In other news, a measure allowing parents 24 hours each year to participate in school events or treat an illness without fear of losing their jobs is back in the House. Representative Roger Bruce pre-filed the Parent Protection Act. Although Representative Bruce has been pushing the legislation in various forms for more than 4 years, and despite support from the education community, the bill died last year. The victim, Bruce says, of political wrangling over House Speaker Glenn Richardson's property tax elimination proposal.
Some of us were called to support that original version of the bill in return for our bills being put forward. And I wasn't willing to make that compromise, and 901 is in la-la land.
The Georgia Chamber of Commerce has also opposed the measure in the past, but Bruce says the two sides have ironed out their differences, and the Parent Protection Act is headed for passage this year.
There was only one sticking point, and hopefully we've addressed it. There was some concern by the Georgia Chamber of Commerce that it would infringe upon their right to fire someone for any reason or no reason, as the law currently allows. Under the new bill, there would be a process put in place prior to any action being taken against an employer if they, for whatever reason, did not comply. So we've addressed all of the concerns, and hopefully this year this bill will go through and begin to serve its intended purpose. All the statistics show that parental involvement increases the opportunity for a child to be successful. So that's the basic element of the bill. In addition to that, this year we've added, at the request of the Council on Aging, that we would also allow for this time to be used to take care of dependent parents. It does not require the employer to pay. It just simply protects the job.
Representative Bruce expects House Bill 37 to again be assigned to the Industrial Relations Committee.
Rule changes, eggs, issues, MLK, and Governor Perdue's 7th State of the State address highlight the first week of the 150th Georgia General Assembly. Here's a look back starting on Monday. Both the House and Senate adopted rule changes for the 2009 session. Most went without a hitch, but the House's reinstatement of the committee hawks triggered House Minority Leader DeBose Porter's first trip to the well.
They kind of swoop in and have the authority to vote the same as any other member of that standing committee. Whether they heard the debate, whether they have a background in that area, whether they know the subject matter, whether they care about it or not, they're sent in to make a vote to control the process.
The Senate's most notable rule change allows bills to be dropped up to the 39th day in the first year of every 2-year session. That's a change from day 30. Early Tuesday morning, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce hosted their annual Eggs and Issues Breakfast, a platform for Governor Perdue, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, and House Speaker Glenn Richardson to unveil a few of their 2009 legislative priorities. Education, transportation, water, and trauma were mentioned in all 3 speeches, but how to weather the $2.2 billion budget deficit dominated the tone.
What we do in these next 40 days will impact every one of you in this room and every citizen in our state.
Wednesday centered around Governor Perdue's State of the State address.
When the economy takes a downturn, you don't give up on the economic promise of America that's proven true over the centuries. You don't discard the promises. You build for the future with that promise in mind. And there's much to do in Georgia in this coming year.
Well, I think the governor did a real good job of just laying the facts out. He was very honest with the state of Georgia. It's something we've been working on for quite a while now, the last 4 months.
I was very disappointed on the issue of transportation. I was hoping to see the governor step up to the plate.
We are at the point where we are now in this so-called crisis because we have not invested in education prior to now.
And on Thursday, Governor Perdue joined in honoring the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Today, we remember and we honor Martin Luther King Jr. for all that he has done for us, his fellow man.
Also on Thursday, Senator Jack Hill shared his revenue concerns with his fellow senators, warning that the situation could get worse before it gets any better.
I think we all realize that we really had not reached bottom.
And that's a look back at week 1 of the 2009 Georgia General Assembly. Now an update on a bill we covered earlier in the week. The Georgia Nuclear Financing Act, Senate Bill 31, was dropped in the Senate today. Senator Don Balfour is the sponsor of the legislation, which would allow Georgia Power to begin charging customers for the construction of 2 nuclear power plants before they are built. We will continue to follow this legislation as it makes its way through the committee process.
When the House and Senate adjourned today, the General Assembly entered a 1-week recess for budget briefings. Those briefings are scheduled Wednesday through Friday of next week. You can watch those budget briefings online. We invite you to check out the resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. You can find the budget briefings there, the latest from GPB Radio's news team, and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more is available at gpb.org/lawmakers. Lawmakers itself will not be broadcast next week. We will return Monday, January 26th for Legislative Day 6. Now returning to our legislative news, when the legislature reconvenes after next week's presidential inauguration, Representatives Tyrone Brooks and Al Williams plan to introduce a resolution on behalf of the Georgia NAACP to offer a state apology for slavery. Although a similar measure failed back in 2007, Representative Williams says the election of the nation's first black president and the celebration of the NAACP's 100th birthday may help to move the measure forward. On Tuesday, the state's leadership presented the business-friendly portions of their legislative agendas to the Georgia Chamber of Commerce at the Eggs and Issues Breakfast. Governor Perdue introduced protection from lawsuits for biotechnical companies and for other industries.
I'm asking the General Assembly to pass another tort reform bill that will provide relief to individuals and companies wrongly sued. In short, if a claim is dismissed at the earliest possible stage, the litigant bringing the claim will be responsible for the prevailing party's attorney fees.
If the attorney fails to notify the client of this provision, that attorney could be liable for that award. Lastly, the bill will make sure that the costly discovery process will not begin until the legal merits of a complaint have been tested. This will free up our courts to pursue justice in cases with merit, protect our existing businesses that provide jobs for Georgians, and attract new investment. With the help of the General Assembly, we'll make plain that the threat of a meritless litigation is not a viable business strategy in Georgia.
Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle pledged to work with the General Assembly to create a statewide transportation program, but he said water management remains critical to growth in the state.
Continue to grow in population and economic prosperity. The United States Supreme Court decision yesterday not to take up our state's petition to preserve the water in Lake Lanier is inexcusable. We have been a good steward of our water resources, and it is unacceptable for bureaucrats in Washington or politicians in other states to try to dictate to us how to manage Georgia water. As long as I am a statewide elected official, I will not stop fighting to protect our water resources, and I will do whatever it takes. Make no mistake, water will be the major issue for the next decade. When it comes to Georgia water on Georgia soil, we cannot retreat. We must defend at all costs.
And in order to increase high school graduation rates, House Speaker Glenn Richardson said he's reintroducing legislation to provide vocational education in every high school.
I don't think we ought to quit till 100% of our high school students graduate from high school. We are 75% is way better than 65, but still we're failing 1 in 4 students. Last year we had a bill that got out of the House and we didn't get it across the finish line. We're going to try it again this year, and it's a simple attempt to take technical and adult education and put it in every single high school in Georgia and teach kids that can't go to college or are not going to go to college and graduate a skill so that we graduate them from high school and put them in the workforce. It's called the Bridge Bill. Representative Fran Millar handled it last year. He'll do it again this year, and we're going to try to do that in the state so that we can raise our high school graduation rates even higher and higher.
Governor Perdue delivered his 7th State of the State address on Wednesday. His message this year was to continue fulfilling the state's core missions during tough economic times, but at the same time stimulating growth for the future.
We will emerge from these challenging times even stronger, even better, with even more potential. This is a pivotal moment in our nation's history. It is a moment in which we are asked to see beyond what George Will calls the tyranny of the short term, beyond the circumstances of the moment to the big picture, a picture that is informed by our history, bolstered by our character, and steeled by our will to succeed. Despite the stresses of moments like these, we must not allow ourselves to be trapped in a short-term mindset where rash decisions result in dire long-term consequences. We must remain focused on the big picture. Our perspective must be one of optimism, even in the face of difficult economic cycles. Our latest revenue estimate for this fiscal year shows a decline of $2.2 billion, resulting in a $19.2 billion amended budget. Political mantras aside, cutting more than 10% from a budget cannot be achieved by simply cutting waste. While we've worked for 6 years to do more with less, at some point in business or in government, it becomes less with less. The job of budgeting is hard right now, but it's not because the directions are complicated. Like families sitting around their kitchen tables all across Georgia, we're doing what is necessary to balance our checkbook.
Governor Perdue later discussed his ongoing plan of rehabbing the much-troubled Department of Transportation and also reorganizing the largest state agency, the Department of Human Resources, which he breaks into 3 departments.
After a thorough review by the Health and Human Services Task Force, we've determined a course of action that will reorient our approach to health care by shifting the focus from inputs to results. First, we're proposing the creation of a new department, a Department of Behavioral Health, which will include all mental health and addictive disease programs. This will improve our responsiveness to mental health needs and will make funding more transparent. We'll continue to improve care by moving towards a community-based delivery system. Secondly, the bill would establish a Department of Health, a combination of the public health and oversight programs in DHR and the current functions of the Department of Community Health. This agency, which will be led by Dr. Rhonda Meadows, will deliver workable solutions on the key health care issues we face each day. Issues affecting Georgians like how best to facilitate and finance health care coverage and how to provide needed access. The remaining social services, developmental disabilities, aging, DFACS, and child support will come together under a reconstituted Department of Human Services led by Commissioner B.J. Walker.
Governor Perdue also discussed bringing more business to Georgia, creating new jobs and companies that can fulfill the nation's future demands for alternative energy.
As Georgia grows, so do our energy needs, and Georgia's meeting this challenge by creating a fertile environment for alternative energy productions. These efforts have been rewarded with $2.4 billion of investment just over the last 2 years. That investment means new jobs for Georgians, and in November, Norcross-based Soneva, birthed right here in one of our research universities, began fabricating the most advanced solar technology in the world. This summer, we will host more than 15,000 energy innovators for the biggest bio-life science conference in the world, Bio 2009, right here in our capital city. And this is an outstanding opportunity to showcase Georgia's progress in life sciences and our potential to heal, fuel, and feed the world.
Coca-Cola Enterprises was honored with an Environmental Leadership Award this morning by the Southeastern Diesel Collaborative. Governor Sonny Perdue spoke at that event, and Lawmakers Minu Hosseini reports.
The Southeast Diesel Collaborative presented Coca-Cola with the Leadership Award in their recognition of the company's efforts to reduce diesel emissions.
Implemented projects that best meet our goals of reducing emissions, improving air quality, and improving public health. And today, I am delighted to report that this is the first ever award that this council has presented. So this really is a milestone today.
Governor Sonny Perdue commended Coca-Cola for what he called accepting corporate responsibility by building fuel-efficient vehicles.
I'm proud. I'm proud to be a Georgian. I'm proud to be governor of Georgia that calls itself home to Coca-Cola Enterprises, a company that accepts its corporate responsibility, its corporate stewardship in such a proactive way.
Coca-Cola hopes to roll out 185 hybrid electric trucks this year, giving them the largest fleet of hybrid electric trucks in all of North America. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Minu Hosseini.
Minority auto dealers in Georgia, which include Senator Emanuel Jones, say if they don't receive financial help, the already dwindling number of minority-owned dealerships in the country will continue to decline. Lawmakers' Emily Banks has more.
Senator Jones and the National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers are asking President-elect Barack Obama to issue an executive order that would create loans through the Small Business Administration.
But what we have here is an effort by dealers across the country, minority dealers across the country, to highlight their plight. And I am glad that Georgia is taking the leadership role in bringing this to the attention of our president-elect.
The group, which held a press conference today, is asking for $1 billion and says loans need to be available within 60 days before more stores like Lusab's are forced to close.
Earlier, I was fortunate enough to have President Bush speak to me about the American dream. Right now, I'm having the American nightmare. I've been in business 42 years, and this is the worst thing that I have ever seen in my life. This is the worst crisis I have ever seen, and it is extremely difficult for first-generation dealers to have the deep pockets to survive this kind of downturn.
Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Emily Banks.
And the halls of the Capitol today were filled with music thanks to Orlando, Florida's Avalon Middle School Advanced Girls Choir. Lawmakers Andrea Hummel-Shelton prepared this report.
We decided to come up to Atlanta because it's Martin Luther King weekend, and so the King site's here, and so we'd come and tour the Capitol and see the King home, and we're lucky enough to have been able to perform in this beautiful space.
Their instructor is a fantastic woman, and she has an awesome talent in bringing the girls together in unison.
This is Avalon Middle School Chorus from Orlando, Florida. Good night from Lawmakers.
Well, before we actually say goodnight, we have one more story, and that is most legislators were sworn in on Monday when the session began. One notable exception was Gainesville Representative Doug Collins, who was wrapping up an Air Force tour of duty in Iraq. Back in the country just 48 hours today, Representative Collins took his oath of office and shared some reflections on the importance of emails he received from his wife and 3 House colleagues.
It was always a pretty good day when I saw some emails. I'd always look the first one to find a note from Lisa, because I knew that my world was connected. And then I had 3 people, 2 in particular, and then a third that almost every day I want to thank. Because they kept me. Kevin Levitas, Mark Hamilton, and Carl Rogers. I'll never forget you, no matter if I was not even here. And to the rest of you, believe me, there's something to be said about an email. Maybe you need to find somebody that you hadn't talked to in a while and send them an email as well. Because when you're that far away from home, just a hey, how you doing means a lot. But it's just pretty amazing just to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Speaker.
And while he was in Iraq, Representative Collins learned that he had passed the state bar exam, so now he can add practicing attorney to Air Force chaplain and legislator in an ever-lengthening list of job titles.
Just another reminder that Lawmakers will not be broadcast next week while the General Assembly is in recess. Lawmakers returns Monday, January 26 at 7 p.m. If you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when Lawmakers repeats on GPB Knowledge. This episode of Lawmakers also repeats Monday morning at 5:30 a.m. here on GPB Television. You can also keep up with all the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up on GPB Television, Bert Wolf Travels and Traditions. Tonight's episode features the islands of Bermuda. That's next. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.